Things that burn. Beacons. The scions of Cold Sun are at large in Wintermark. During the summer solstice they tried to burn the raven aviaries of Ishal, but were turned back. In the months following, under the power of ascendant day magic, they burned Freya's garden, and would have destroyed even more without the vigilance of the people of the Mark. Then, 2 weeks before the autumn equinox, thousands of heralds emerged from Reggio in Hanmark and Calavesa, bent on bringing ruin to Valasmark and Rundle Marsh. The heroes of Anvil managed to stop them from annihilating the augurs of the opalescent gloaming, the allies of the Imperial Seer, but forces of Cold Sun spreading across Wintermark still remained an immediate and potentially existential threat. The Silence Arc. Long before there was an empire, someone carved the image of a door into the exposed rock face of a winding gully, deep in the hills of Valasmark. Shaped in the image of the Rune of Revelation, the Lantern Gate marked the heart of an unremarkable Reggio, attuned to the day realm. There was little there to attract those hungry for power or enlightenment. Over the centuries, a handful of mystics and truth-seekers made the arduous journey up into the hills, seeking clarity and meditating on the nature of truth. A fortnight before the autumn equinox, the door opened. The Steiner mystic camped there watched in horror as a legion of heavily armed soldiers marched through the portal. 3,000 scions of the Cold Sun. They fled, stumbling into Valas Hall, raving and ranting, half their body already crumbling to white ashes. That nameless mystic survived barely long enough to warn of the Legion's coming, before the terrible curse consumed them. Their warning lit the beacons, and heroes gathered across Hanmark. The scions of Cold Sun moved cautiously at first, but with dire purpose. They fortified the Lantern Gate, scouting and raiding parties radiating outwards in all directions. They slew everyone they encountered, no quarter, no mercy, no remorse. Those in their path faced a hard choice, flee or fight. Any hall that could not repel them burned. A twisted mirror of the beacons of Wintermark blossomed on the hillsides across Valasmark and the downs of southern Cronemark. The heroes of Valas Hall centred the defence. The champions, seeking a name, fought fiercely, aiding their neighbours, securing opportunities for flight at the cost of their own lives. It was inevitable that the scions would eventually turn their alien eyes towards the hall built by Brigid, daughter of Guntham, a place dedicated to training the greatest warriors of the nation in memory of a beloved father, a place where Scops gather to celebrate the deeds of heroes, a place anathema to the principles of oblivion. The seemingly unstoppable scions assembled in their thousands in the hills across Valas Hall. Yet the true beacons had done their job, and done it well. 13 heroes of Wintermark, bringing nearly 1,500 warriors between them, answered the call and gathered at the beacon towers before making their way to the southern border. They too came to Valas Hall, gathering like storm clouds ahead of the inevitable battle. Outnumbered more than 2 to 1, they made preparations to resist Cold Sun. To defend Valas Hall, to protect the halls of the Scops where the names of countless generations were preserved and celebrated, it seemed the battle could only end one way, but not one champion balked at the price to be paid. As the sun set on the last day, the Scops sang the sagas of heroes great and small. In the first hour of twilight, a cold mist descended and swirled around Valasheim. The first snows of winter billowed down from the hills, touching everything with frost. The voices of the Scops crystallised into clouds as they sang. Heroes clustered close around the campfires before the halls of Brigid Gunthamsdottir. And when the first rays of the morning sun touched the snow and the mist, it solidified with a creaking roar into a girdle of glacial ice 30 feet high, ringing Valasheim with towers and ramparts, with a single gate of crimson wood hung with banners of ice bear and frost wolf. As the walls shimmered into being, the defenders of Valas Hall were bolstered by 1,000 warriors from the court of Cathan Cannae. Great bipedal bears in heavy crimson robes with hooked polearms stand beside Steinir in heavy armour. Rangy wolf-born warriors with fur of snow-white and ice-blue, armoured in chain and scale and bearing wicked ashwood longbows join the Suak. 3 ice giants tower above the doors of the Galen Hall, furious sentinels standing beside the Calavesi ready to protect the scrolls of saga and song stored within. A cheer, ragged at first, and then growing like thunder, rises from 2,000 throats, echoing across the hills as the sun rises. If the Scions are surprised by this development, they do not show it. They launch their assault against the frozen citadel with preternatural precision. The first probing strikes to test the defences culminate in a vicious, focused assault on the Redwood Gate. As Scions fall left and right around them, the Grand Archon of the Silence Arc touches the gate with their blue iron rod, and the scarlet iron-bound planks explode to splinters. No portal can stand against the Archons of the Silence Arc. The attackers pour through, to slaughter and burn. There is something profoundly unnerving about them. Most warriors cry out when they're hurt, threaten and jeer at their foes, chant war songs, pound drums, cheer their victories, groan when they're driven back. Not the Silence Arc. They give voice to no hymns of battle, do not waste time goading their foes, do not cheer or groan. They simply fight, to kill and to break, to reduce to ashes. By contrast, the heroes who stand against them, bolstered by the heralds of Cath and Kane, roar with the fury of the blizzard and the storm. Those Scops who have not joined the Ice Giants to protect Galen Hall roar the hero's song, calling the names of those past and present. The walls of ice ring with the rage of the Winterfolk, unleashed against these unnatural invaders. A cry is taken up, for Freya and Bridget, building their anger at the destruction of the Herbmaster's garden, invoking the memory of the founder of Valus Hall. Battle rages back and forth for the better part of a day, but as the sun starts to drop towards the horizon, the Scions of Cold Sun are forced back through the broken gates of the circling citadel. Valus Hall is damaged, but still stands. The doors of Galen Hall have been broken, 2 of the Ice Giants slain, but not a single scroll has been destroyed, and not one of those given refuge within has been harmed. Drums and falcon horns cry out in victory. The Scions have been driven back, but their army is not defeated. It is impossible to say with certainty how many of them have fallen before the fury of Wintermark. When life flees, their bodies fall to ash. What is certain is that 200 warriors of Valus Hall have found their names in death, and each one will be celebrated by the Scops for their sacrifice. For now, though, there is still work to be done. The heroes regroup, count the fallen, and give chase. Childer of Wintermark and Chosen of the Blizzard Queen together give chase to the servants of the Cold Sun, who dared to invade Wintermark from their bitter realm. Normally, when a frozen citadel is raised in a place, the heralds that accompany it remain behind the walls of ice and granite. Not this time. The wolf folk and bear folk roam across southern Hunmark alongside the Wintermark. When they gather at a beacon, the flames leap high and fierce and burn pale blue in honour of their mistress. Wherever there is cold sun, they are there, mortal and unmortal alike. As the winter solstice draws near, the Silence Arc are driven out of the hills of Valismark. Their camp at the Lantern Gate is abandoned, and the Scions forced back into the northwest into Cronemark. The Battle of Valus Hall is won, but the war is by no means over. The invaders from the Dayrealm are battered, their numbers clearly reduced, but they are not defeated. Unlike the halls of Valismark, those of the Downs are less fortified, less ready to face the threat of an army of Scions. There are no hills here to support a frozen citadel, and while the beacons still burn, those in the path of the Silence Arc are forced to flee their homes, heading north as the weather worsens and the winter snow begins to fall in earnest. The names of the brave captains are Anduin Dunwolf, Benny, Bitwolf Dunwolf, Bronn Dunwolf, Horst Dunning, Tobrighton Dunning, Jorma Steelhail, Morkar Sigvardsson, Ragnar, Sigar Verin, Skade Folksdottir, Urvaki Tavasban, and Gloomy, Harmonist of the Dawn. Game information. The warbands who answered the call to oppose Cold Sun, coupled with the frozen citadel of Cath and Kane, mean that the Silence Arc has been defeated. Unlike a mortal army, however, the Scions are not forced to retreat out of the territory. They have been damaged and driven out of the hills of Valismark, but they have not left Hunmark and remain a threat. Thanks to the military units, the death toll has been comparatively light, but the Winterfolk have not escaped unscathed. Several halls in Valus Hall were overcome before the fateful attack on Valismark. Several hundred defenders and non-combatant Winterfolk have lost their lives. The situation could have been significantly worse. Thanks to the blessing of Cold Sun enjoyed by the Scions, it required a combination of a magical fortress in just the right location and warbands of Wintermark heroes to turn Cold Sun back. If they hadn't been forced to deal with the frozen citadel of Cath and Kane in the region they were attacking, or if the military units had not been there, they would have begun to take control of Valismark in the name of their terrible sovereign. Participation. Hanmark. Any of the Wintermark characters who sent their military unit to support the beacons of Hanmark is assumed to have taken part in the Battle of Valashall and fought alongside the heralds of Cathan Cannae. As well as the gratitude of Valashall, each defender has received a gift in recognition of their heroism from the red-robed bearfolk warriors of the Summer Realm. Each character receives a golden apple, with the injunction that they use it to seek out a boon from Imperial magicians, one that will help them continue to fight the invaders of the Day Realm. There is also an opportunity for some heroes of Anvil to pass through the Sentinel Gate and face scions of the Silence Arc, the Hammer. The Exigent Span. The Swanmere in Rundle Marsh is a place of quiet contemplation, a stand of ancient willow trees dragging their long green hair in a mirror-smooth lake, frequented by swans that sometimes speak with human voices. Before things went bad with Yelenrith who was, an occasional Ice Walker would visit to seek counsel from the swans. After the extent of the corruption consuming the Eternal was recognised by the Imperial Conclave, the place was shunned. Unfortunately, this made it easy for the Scions of Cold Sun, the soldiers of the Exigent Span, to pass through the Regio in force. Before anyone knew what was happening, they had slaughtered the swans, burned the trees, and were practically at the gates of Rundle. While the bulk of their force advanced towards the capital of Calavesa, raiding parties fanned out in all directions, bringing ruin to anything they could find. Normal fire does not burn on the water, but the radiance of Cold Sun is something else. It sears the life from the land, and it purges the lakes, leaving them pure and still and dead, empty of anything save water. Where previously a warband of heralds had failed to burn the aviaries of Ishal during the summer solstice, an army of 3,000 scions, bound in perfect harmony, sought the destruction of the heart of Calavesa, perhaps even of Wintermark itself. Fortunately, the marshes are not undefended. The foresight of Imperial magicians has seen 3 enchanted wards raised across Calavesa shortly after the autumn equinox. Mists rise in West Marsh, Calavesa Marsh, and the Rundle Marsh itself. The winterfolk are familiar with these wards. Barely a season has passed in recent years where there has not been at least one region of the marshes shrouded in protective fog drawn from the Night Realm. Travellers have become familiar with the odd creatures that sometimes issue from them. The long-legged lanternfolk, the sable herons, the great 8-legged lizards that surge from the waters to devour foolish invaders. This time, there is something different. The mists seem to be empty. When night falls, the beacons of Rundle Marsh and Calavesa Marsh and West Marsh burn with a dancing, unnatural emerald hue, but beyond that nothing. Some pilgrims passing through the shrouded regions swear they can hear the distant echoes of a thunderstorm, or perhaps a great voice roaring with anger in the creaking of the willows and the gulping drone of the frogs. For all that they are uninhabited, though, they still work to confuse and misdirect the Scions of Cold Sun, to buy time for the defenders of Calavesa to gather, to come to Rundle and protect the heart. 10 heroes and their warbands come to the flaring beacon call. Over 1,000 warriors answer the threat of Cold Sun. Scarcely in time, they arrive to support the defenders of the place some say is the oldest continuous settlement in the whole of the nation. They are barely enough, a third of the size of the forces gathering against the approaching storm. When they come, the Exigent Span drive like a spear towards the very heart of the marshes, their entire force united to strike a single, devastating stroke, not against the walls of Rundle, but against the Sovereign itself. The Grand Archon of the Exigent Span bears a beacon of its own, an eye of blue crystal the size of an ogre's skull. Standing on the very edge of the lake, on the humble wooden quay from which so many heroes of the Mark have made their journey to the final sleep, the leader of the Scions unveils the crystal, invoking the power of its grim master. As the sun begins to set, a terrible liquid light starts to flow from the beacon, blue-white as mithril under moonlight, forming a beam of radiance that sears through the mist and fog, burning it away. Where it touches the waters of the Sovereign, in the gaps between the fog, the waters begin to boil, purified by the terrible illumination. The Exigent Span means to burn the heart from the people of Wintermark. Once the last strands of fog conjured from the forests of the night have been seared away, the light of the Cold Sun will blaze across the waters of the lake and end the slumber of the heroes who rest beneath the Sovereign. A desperate band of heroes break from the walls of Rundle and attack the flanks of the Exigent Span, but they are massively outnumbered. There is no hope that they will be able to reach the quay in time. But the heart of Wintermark is protected. The mystics have kept watch over the marshes of Calavesa longer than anyone can remember. Before the Steinir fell from the heavens, they were there. Before the desperate union with the Suak to resist the trolls, before the ancestors of the Ushka came down from the north, before the Urizen raised their spires, before Turunial built their cities, they watched over the marshes, watched the birds, read the omens. The force from Rundal is a feint, falling back almost immediately. The Scions give chase, brutally cutting down anyone who falls behind, but while their attention is focused to the north, a second group of winterfolk attack from the south. Forewarned by the mystics' arts, they have spent the last 3 days hidden from the sight of the cold sun by the dripping echoes of the fens, hiding amongst the willows, waiting for the sign, ready to strike the exigent span at the moment of their triumph. 1,000 champions of the mark, supported by bear and hawk-masked Calavesi warriors, strike the Scion's weaker flank, the one turned away from Rundal. They push through, taking the heralds by surprise despite the blessings of Cold Sun. Hard and fast against the Grand Archon and its guard, a small number of Calavesi with skiffs, defended by shield-proud champions, launch an attack across the waters themselves, hitting the invaders from the one direction they could not have expected. And if those who fight on the shores of the Sovereign are to be believed, there are stranger beings fighting alongside them. In the silence before dawn, after the battle, they might speak of the shapes they saw, the barely there sentinels that guided their hands, that struck where they struck, that whispered warnings, that stirred the anger in their blood, that turned aside the enemy blade at the crucial moment. Perhaps they were just figments of the fog, the hopes and fears of the defenders of Rundal given shape by the night magic glamour of the wards. Perhaps they were something more, here on the edge of the Sovereign, where the heroes sleep. Nobody knows who strikes the fateful blow, cuts down the Grand Archon of the exigent span, and shatters their blue-white beacon. But they are slain, and the eye is broken. The light snaps away instantly. The warding fog comes pouring back in. A cry goes up from the walls of Rundal. The ravens of Ishal are in flight. A contingent of mystics and masked warriors and a war party of Hylia from the Rixvesi have come to aid in the defence. From across the lake, from Westerhall, a small fleet of fishing vessels emerge from the fog, carrying the warriors of the West Marsh Halls. They might have arrived too late, but the mists speed them on their way, and together with the exhausted defenders of Rundal they fall on the exigent span, and they drive them before them, back from the weed-choked shores of the Sovereign. Over the succeeding months, battle rages back and forth across Rundal Marsh, and in the end the exigent span is put to flight. They retreat northward into Skymark, with the heroes of Wintermark close on their heels. The loss of the Grand Archon seems to have had little effect on the Scions. Immediately after the battle on the quay below Rundal, a new Grand Archon is seen at the heart of the exigent span. The blue-eye beacon, however, does not seem as easily replaced. While the Scions continue to fight viciously and kill anyone who comes within their reach, they no longer seem to wield the power to purge the marsh waters of life. Hopefully, Cold Sun will not be able to provide them with another beacon. Hopefully. If the visions of the mystics are to be believed, and why would they not be, had the light of the cold sun been allowed to penetrate the Sovereign, it would have spread through the marshes, purifying the waters, destroying the bones that rest there, and burning the heart from the nation. Such an unthinkable outcome has been avoided, for now, thanks to the forethought of the magicians and the courage of the warbands. But nobody in Calavesa should rest easy while Scions remain in Skymark. If the dead in the marshes had been defiled, such an act would have echoed back and forth across the nation, changing it forever, and had dire implications for the armies in particular. What can be tried once might be attempted again. Cold Sun's forces may have been driven back, but they are not defeated. As any mystic knows, even after the darkest night, the sun still rises. The names of the captains that fought bravely here were Mort, Elthric Dunning, Kingu, Yorvith, Ovis, Skjal Shadowbreaker, Hadvar, Ludwig Marshwalker, Blaith Sian, and Ansel the Nameless. Game information. Calavesa. As with Hanmark, the combination of military units and conjured wards helped to thwart the Cold Sun's forces. They have been beaten for the moment, but unlike mortal armies, they have not been driven from the territory. They are regrouping in Skymarch. The wards and warriors and the singular focus of the exigent span on the Sovereign have meant that the death toll here is lower than it was in Hanmark. Still, at least 100 winterfolk, both warriors and non-combatants, have been slain by the Scions in Rundal Marsh and at the Battle of the Sovereign. Participation. Calavesa. Each character who sent a military unit to Calavesa to fight alongside the beacons is assumed to have been at the Battle of the Sovereign. It is up to you what role you played, as a part of the desperate feint to distract the Scions, as part of the ambush from the quays, or as part of the skiff riders who attacked across the lake itself. You may choose to roleplay an encounter in the fog, a brief glimpse of what might have been the spirit of a dead hero, or might have been part of the magical glamour that accompanied the Night Wards. Likewise, any mystic character is free to roleplay that they were one of those who saw the visions of the coming threat and helped warn the defenders of Rundor. Details vary, but the meaning is the same. A terrible blue fire spreading across the Southerven and burning the heart out of the people of Calavesa and Wintermark. There is also a conjunction during the winter solstice that will allow some Imperial heroes to travel to Calavesa and face scions of the Exigent Span, a hero in the night.